podcast.
Welcome to Our Weird World. I'm your host, John Hanssen, and today talking about some spies and how this is what spying was really like. You know, like we see all these movies like 007 and espionage and handing over the secret nuclear codes. It's not really like that. All right. If I'm being honest with you, like actual like real life spy stuff, kind of boring. Right? I know I'm really selling this episode right now. But we're looking at two stories, two guys who worked for the CIA, and then the Russians were like, hey, why don't you give us secret? We give you big American dollar. And then they were just like, yeah, that sounds fine. What's the worst that could happen? And this is it. These are the stories of what happened. We're looking at the stories of Robert Hanssen, and our first one today will be of Edwin Wilson.
Story time. Story time. Story time. Story time.
I just had lunch and I am short of breath at the moment because I don't learn my lesson. And I just ran up the stairs after I ate to come sit down and record this. And I don't give myself time to just calm down and breathe. I'm just always go. My mind is always racing with all of the thoughts that are pointless, really, most of the time. Anyway, that's not here nor there. Edwin Wilson grew up in a poor family in Idaho, but he worked hard and he graduated from the University of Portland and joined the Marines. He then fought in the Korean War, but was discharged after 3 years after he suffered a knee injury. But because he had been so impressive during the military service, he was a great soldier, very loyal, smart, everything. The CIA then recruited him to come work for them. So Wilson's first assignment was to guard U-2 spy planes in Turkey, but that was way too far below his pay grade. All right. He was way better than that. So the CIA then sent him to Cornell to study labor relations before adding him to their international organizations division. From there, Wilson used his new Ivy League education to destabilize communist labor unions in Europe with the help of the Corsican mob and also unleashing several plagues of cockroaches. And that's not me making a joke or a misdirect. That's just the kind of dorky stuff that the CIA was doing back in the 60s, in the 50s and 60s. Like that, like all the conspiracies you want to believe about the CIA and like the hand that they had in everything going on around the world. Like most of them are probably true. All right. Like all of the coups that they, supported, getting certain leaders ousted, all of the communist things that they disrupted. Absolutely 100%. I believe most, if not all of it. All right. Based on everything that I've learned, during the course of this show and writing my history books and all of that. And so Edwin Wilson, he's part of this. He is literally, the CIA literally got him an Ivy League education. And then he, through the CIA, works with the Corsican mob, the mob on the island of Corsica, Mediterranean, French, maybe it's Italian, probably Italian. But the mob there, and then they unleashed several different plagues of cockroaches all over Europe, especially in areas where communist unions were congregating. CIA, USA, whatever. By the 1960s, though, Wilson had really found his niche. He was part of the CIA's Special Operations Division and spent his time setting up fake companies to secretly ship various supplies around the world, because also a thing that the CIA does a lot of, because you can do that when you are the government and you don't have to then you could just tell the government and the IRS, like, hey, we're not paying taxes on Dingleberry Incorporated because that's us. So we're just going to write it off as an expense in our budget. Don't you worry about it, IRS. And we're just going to ship all of these weapons to these rebel groups in communist countries to overthrow their government. Oh my God. As part of this, right, he sent boat parts to the Congo, which were then used to intercept Soviet arms shipments that were being ferried across Lake Tanganyika, which is, a giant lake that borders the Democratic Republic of Congo and Tanzania. He also sent crowd control gear to South America. He sent spy equipment to Iran, and he sent various other weapons to a rebel group in Indonesia who was planning a coup to overthrow their, communist leader at the time. Well, in 1971, Wilson left the CIA and moved to the Office of Naval Intelligence. His first mission there was to go to Libya to monitor Carlos the Jackal, a Venezuelan terrorist who had been involved in several Middle Eastern attacks the previous year. Because of sanctions that had been placed on Libya at the time, the country, namely its leader Muammar Gaddafi, remember him, Hillary Clinton and stuff, he was willing to pay whatever it took to obtain the weapons. So, Gaddafi, he's not a friend of the Americans, but Wilson, he was still operating all of these fake companies that he set up through the CIA. And so he took one of these companies, we'll call it Blue Waffle Enterprises. And so he takes Blue Waffle Enterprises and starts working with the Libyans and Muammar Gaddafi to smuggle weapons and military uniforms into the country, which is probably something that the United States didn't actually want. He also recruited a group of retired Green Berets to go to Libya and train their military because some dudes just can't really get out of the military. However, Wilson, not really as smart as he thought he was, because the Libyans then turned around and used the weapons and supplies that he had smuggled them to create bombs out of radios, which were then used in terrorist attacks carried out by the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine General Command. So, that kind of backfired on him. He probably just wanted the Libyans to be able to defend themselves, and instead they went and used them to go commit more terrorist attacks. So, Wilson's work here made the Office of Naval Intelligence very nervous, and tensions eventually rose to the point where Wilson just chose to retire from the agency. However, even though he was retired, he wasn't even working for the government anymore. The CIA continued to let him run Dingleberries Incorporated and Blue Waffle Enterprises and all of these other fake companies that he had created, earning him as much as $20 million. And in the 1970s, that's a ton of money. It's a ton of money now, way more in the 1970s. His biggest sale with Blue Waffle Enterprises came in 1977 when he sold 20 tons of C4 explosives to Libya, which just so happened to be the United States' entire inventory of C4. And because everyone assumed that Blue Waffle Enterprises was still a CIA operation, no one questioned it. They saw the payment come through. They saw it go right into Wilson's bank account. And they said, oh, it's Blue Waffle Enterprises. We don't need to worry about it. That's a CIA thing. Well, it wasn't. In 1982, I really hope that that's what kind of the names were. In 1982, Wilson then formed another company, a fake company, under the guise of shipping military aid to Egypt. However, the FBI found out about this one and charged Wilson with firearms and explosives violations after finding that he had overcharged the government by $8 million for those supplies. As he awaited trial on this, Wilson asked an inmate to just go out and kill the prosecutors trying to find him guilty of these charges. That inmate immediately found an undercover agent posing as another prisoner who was willing to do the job. This undercover agent / prisoner, who was then wearing a wire, recorded Wilson asking him to not only kill his prosecutors, but 6 witnesses and his ex-wife. Because, I mean, when you're in this deep, you might as well just go all out, right? He was obviously found out about this, and he was found guilty of shipping guns and explosives. He was sentenced to 32 years in prison for that, and then an additional 24 years was added for the conspiracy to commit murder, which seems light right? Like, because he's not just conspiring to kill one person, he's conspiring to kill multiple prosecutors plus 6 witnesses plus his ex-wife. So probably like at least 10 people, right? But only 24 years for that. It's weird. In 2004, however, Wilson was let out of prison after it was discovered that the government had lied about its involvement with him. Uh-oh, what a surprise that the United States government would try to cover up some of the shady dealings that it was doing in the 1970s. And then it finally came to light, like, oh yeah, the government just let this guy do this a lot. Although the CIA had claimed that they never had any contact with him between 1971 and 1978, further investigations revealed that they had actually communicated with him at least 80 times, most of which were eerily close to various plots and assassinations going on overseas. Way to go, CIA. Our other story here, is of Robert Hanssen, who was born on April 18th, 1944 in Chicago to an emotionally abusive police officer father. However, instead of becoming like a sadistic serial killer, as is usually the case when, these stories start out like this, Hanssen kind of channeled it into like some positive juju or whatever. And he went on to earn his chemistry and MBA degrees, eventually working his way up to a job with the FBI. He also got married to an extremely Catholic woman named Bonnie Walk, and because Hanssen was such a great guy, he himself converted to Catholicism and joined the Opus Dei, an evangelical group aimed at spreading the Catholic message through living super Jesus-y lives and doing extra Christian service. So, like, he didn't even grow up in a religious household, but he marries Bonnie. Bonnie's super Catholic, and Robert's like, yeah, I'll just do that. That's fine. And then he just goes and becomes super Catholic too. By 1979, Hanssen had worked his way up in the FBI ranks to a position in the counterintelligence unit, where he was then tasked with compiling a database of Soviet intelligence. For whatever reason, at this point, Hanssen decided to actually contact the Soviet Main Intelligence Directorate, which was GRU, and offered to just work for them instead, that's a crazy turn. Like, out of nowhere, right? Like, dude is just like, yeah, I live my life for Jesus. I'm super Catholic. I'm just going to gather a bunch of Soviet intelligence. You know what? Why don't I just work for the Soviets? I know everything about them now. And that's what he did. He immediately began telling the GRU about the FBI's bugging activities and shared the FBI's list of suspected Soviet spies. So he's just like, hey, Russians, here are all the people that we think are already Russian spies. Do you want to confirm or deny this? And then he also ratted out Dmitry Polyakov, who was kind of doing the opposite. Like, he was originally a Soviet spy before becoming an American spy. And then Hanssen exposed him, which then led to Polyakov's eventual execution by the Soviets. In 1981, Hanssen was transferred from New York City to Washington, D.C. because he's still in the FBI, and he gets this promotion to get even more access to even more sensitive materials. To make things worse, he was transferred to the Soviet Analytical Unit and was tasked with studying, identifying, and capturing Soviet spies. When he obviously didn't capture any Soviet spies because he's just telling the Soviets who he's going after, he was transferred back to New York to continue his original work on the Soviet database. On October 1st, 1985, Hanssen then sent an anonymous letter to the KGB asking for $100,000 in exchange for highly classified information. As part of this, to kind of, wet their whistle, he named 3 FBI agents who were also secret Russian spies that threatened to expose them. Expose them and help out the U.S., right? So he knows of 3 other FBI agents who are working for the Russians, and he says, hey, give me $100,000. I'll give you some more classified deets, but if you don't do it, I'm going to expose these 3 double agents. So although one of the men named by Hanssen, his name was Boris Yuzhin, had already been exposed months prior by another FBI agent, the other 2 men, Valery Martyanov and Sergei Motorin, were then called back to Moscow and actually executed by the Russian government. In 1987, Hanssen was then called back to Washington, D.C. to ironically study all known rumored penetrations of the FBI by Russian spies and to actually figure out who exposed Martyanov and Motorin. which was him. So the FBI literally hired him to find himself, which we see that happen several times throughout history. So obviously he's not going to do it, but he's like in the most secure position ever. He's killing it in the spy game right now. And so not only did he not rat himself out to the FBI, but he sent his entire study, which contained a list of every Soviet who had contacted the FBI about moles, to the KGB. So, again, the FBI goes and like hires him to find who ratted out these double agents. It was obviously him. He builds this entire report anyway that he then sends to the Russians. The following year, 1988, Hanssen warned the KGB about Felix Bloch, another FBI double agent for the Soviets who had come under suspicion for espionage, which then forced the KGB to end their communications with Bloch. Additionally, Hanssen told the Soviets about a secret tunnel the FBI had built beneath the decoding room of the Russian embassy, along with a full list of American double agents. Dude's just exposing everybody. Although the FBI never actually used this tunnel to spy on the Soviets, Hanssen was paid $55,000 for that information. In 1990, Hanssen's sister-in-law found a pile of cash sitting on a dresser and wondered what it was for. And it's probably tens of thousands of dollars. After telling Mark Walk, who was Hanssen's brother-in-law, his wife's brother, about it, Mark went to the FBI and recommended that they investigate Hanssen for espionage, but no one did anything about it because the FBI's probably like, nah, he knows who all the Russian spies are. Why would he himself be a Russian spy? That didn't make any sense. So also, now that, when the Soviet Union then collapsed in 1991, Hanssen's basically out of a job, right? He breaks off all communication with the Soviets out of fear that he would then be exposed by the new government. But Hanssen couldn't really quit his Soviet lovers, right? Like he still wanted to get that sweet cash. So 10 months later, he reached out to the GRU and met an officer in the parking garage of the Russian embassy. Hanssen identified himself as Ramon Garcia, his Soviet code name, which is great. And then handed this officer a package of documents. The officer, however, did not recognize Hanssen's code name, and he ran off, just ran out of the parking. Like he freaks out. And then he files a protest with the State Department claiming that Hanssen was a triple agent. I don't even know how that works, right? So I'm spying on the Russians who then pay me to give them the information, but then I'm also just back working for the Americans to tell them all the things that the Russians are asking me to do for them. I don't get, it's too complicated at this point. I can't follow it. Still, despite this complaint, all of this going on, nothing was ever investigated. So when Hanssen wasn't busy, backstabbing his own country, he was letting people watch him have sex with his wife. Why? I don't know. That's a weird detail that comes out of absolutely nowhere in this story. But dude is a Russian spy. He's a double agent. And then on the side, he's just got this weird kink where he's going in to bone his wife whenever, and he's just going to casually leave the window open so peeping Toms outside can watch him get some of that going, which is wild. I don't know why. Why? Why is that the thing that you need? Anyway, at one point, this is crazy. At one point, Hanssen let his friend Jack Hoschauer watch them have sex through the bedroom window. Hanssen later went on to secretly videotape his adult fun time and shared them with others on early internet chat rooms. By 1999, Hanssen felt pretty confident that the FBI still had no idea what he had done and reestablished contact with the SVR, which was the new KGB in Russia. However, the FBI had actually spent the last few years and over 7 million taxpayer dollars investigating the mole who had exposed the tunnel story and the identities of Martinoff and Motorin. When FBI analyst Bob King found an incriminating note with the term purple pissing Japanese on it, he remembered that was a quote Hanssen often used and connected the dots, which is a crazy thing. I don't even know how you would use the phrase purple pissing Japanese in regular conversation. And of course that would stick out because no one says dumb things like that. So Bob King figures it out. The FBI quickly places Hanssen under surveillance and discovers that he is back in contact with the Russians. So In order to keep a closer eye on him, Hanssen was actually awarded a promotion in December of 2000 to oversee the FBI's computer security. He was even given an assistant named Eric O'Neill, who was really just a spy hired by the FBI to go spy on the guy who was a spy for the FBI, who was then spying on the Russians. It's so complicated at this point. And honestly, Hanssen has not really even given them a ton of valuable information. He's just gotten dudes killed, which is bad. I get it. But it's not like he's telling the Russians that the United States is planning to attack you on this day. Here's where you'll find all our soldiers so you can go kill them all first. No, he's not giving them any kind of information that's clearly going to cause a bunch of problems. All right. But it's also still the year 2000 and we're still dealing with Russian spies, which we probably still are, which is wild. It's so stupid, but it's what's going on. O'Neill eventually hacked into Hanssen's Palm Pilot. Remember those? I had one of those. Those were fun. I felt like an adult and I just had games on it. He hacked into Hanssen's Palm Pilot to download the files that he kept on there. And that, it was all of his correspondence with the KGB, and the FBI finally had the evidence they needed to arrest him. Now, at this point, though, Hanssen kind of suspects that the FBI is onto him. So he doesn't care because whatever, what are they going to do? Clearly they haven't done anything for 30 years at this point. So despite that, he drives to Foxstone Park in Virginia on February 18th, 2001, and places a piece of white tape on a sign as a signal to his Russian contact to go retrieve the information that he promised them. He then tossed a trash bag full of documents off of a bridge and into a creek. At that point, the FBI, who had been following him the whole time, stormed out and into the area and arrested him. All Hanssen had to say was "What took you so long?" which is a direct quote, and they carried him off. Hanssen pleaded guilty to 14 counts of espionage in one attempt of something and was sentenced to 15 consecutive life sentences without parole at one of the highest security prisons in the country. All right, there you go. Some super secret spy stuff. I'll have some more stories like this later on down the road, maybe next year, and a year or 2 years from now, whatever. Anyway, I don't know. I don't remember where I put it, but just, it happens. There's all kinds of spy stuff going on, but it's not really how it's depicted in TV shows and movies. So let's recap and see what we actually learned today.
What did we learn?
Number one, for all of our sakes, we better hope that everything the CIA did in the 50s and 60s and 70s and probably the 80s, we really better hope that none of that ever gets brought to light, because the things that we know now are super ridiculous. I can't imagine the kind of insanity that's still classified. All right. Number two, what's his face? Edwin Wilson was allowed to, speaking of the CIA being ridiculous, was allowed to just create fake companies. And he earned as much as $20 million selling American weapons and supplies, basically to terrorists. And the CIA was just yeah, it's fine. We're not even going to worry about it. And then, of course, those terrorists then use those items to commit terrorist acts. Anyway, and then number three, Robert Hanssen was a spy on the Russians and then turned around and spied on the Americans, who then hired him to spy on the Russians, even though he was still spying on the Americans. And then he got an assistant who was spying on the spy who was spying against them by spying on the enemy who was spying for. Anyway, you get it. There's a lot of layers to it. He finally got caught after some 30 years, which is wild in and of itself.
What did we learn?
Next week on Our Weird World, it is the start of December. We're winding down 2024, and we're going to bring back the weird fun bag. It's been about 3 months because we had Serial Killer September, and then we were doing our spooky shows in October, and then I kept doing aliens in November, but now it's the first of the month. Wake up! And then, I hate that song so much. And then Never Fails, man. First of the month on my TikTok feed. Wake up! Eat the first of the month. Anyway, you get it. It's the second of the month next Monday, so it doesn't even matter. I'm an idiot. It's the Weird Fun Bag, the 13th edition. We are looking at the stories of Richard Parker, Albert Johnson, and going way back in history to the story of Phalaris and the Brazen Bull. It's Weird Fun Bag. It's an assortment of silliness. So come on back next week and hear about those 3 stories. That's going to do it. Thanks so much for continuing to listen. Keep telling all your friends about the show and keep it weird.
This is a podcast.